When you have something you really want to show off, you frame it. More on this design principle in today's show. Over the past 20 years as a garden designer, I've enjoyed helping homeowners create private sanctuaries full of beauty and wonder. I find each garden to be a fresh opportunity to explore ways to create uniquely personal spaces. These are just a few of the gardens I've helped to transform into garden homes. Hi, I'm Alan Smith. Welcome to the Garden Home, where you'll find practical ideas, beautiful landscapes, and much more to help inspire you to push the boundaries of your home out into the garden, to the edges of your property. Now, in today's show, we're going to focus on an idea that when it's present in the landscape, it's hard to miss. This principle of design is called framing the view. Now, I've brought my easel and paints out into this beautiful garden I helped design several years ago, taking advantage of this lovely fall day. This home and garden are based around this magnificent view of the mountain range beyond. This view makes the perfect setting that any artist would enjoy painting. In fact, I think of framed views in the garden the way an artist would. I'm framing beautiful garden pictures. Over the past 20 years, I've had the opportunity to create lots of garden homes. And I've realized that there are certain secrets that help you transform an ordinary garden or yard into a beautiful garden home. You see, the way I see it, good garden design is about good picture making. Now, when we create a garden, we also have to think of screening views. You see, this works hand in hand with framing the views. We want to embrace the beautiful views and screen the unsightly ones. Now, a little later in the show, I'm going to give you a list of some of the best screening plants for doing just that job. Now, it's important to understand that framing the view is just one of the elements needed to create an attractive and interesting garden home. In fact, I've reduced the list down to 12 principles. Now, we don't have time to cover all 12 in this show, but we'll focus on a few that complement frame the view, specifically accenting the entry and utilizing garden focal points. When it comes to framing the view, I think the great landscape painters throughout history can teach us a lot. We can take a page from art class and transform it into our own personal garden masterpiece. Now, when we started this garden about 10 years ago, it was a blank canvas. Nothing was here. The owners found the property and soon after sited the house and the garden. They were drawn to this property because of its privacy and magnificent views. Now, as the design process began to unfold, we discovered wonderful garden views to frame. Ward Lyle, architect on the project, explains how we framed many of the views in the garden. Ward, this property has so many beautiful views. How did you arrive at positioning the house exactly here?
Well, one of the goals of the project was to have a view out over the valley towards the mountains and towards the sunset. And it just happened the end of this ridge faced due west. We just lined the house up on the compass points.
Well, I noticed now over the years that the pine trees have even begun to grow up enough to hide the power lines.
It was sort of an accidental occurrence that the pines were already established, but they've helped us to really screen out the view of the road down there and of the power lines.
Well, screening views is certainly a part of this idea of framing the best views. Well, I know from the beginning your idea was to create an interior space that reached out into the garden and embraced those views.
All along, a big part of the planning of this house was the outdoor living spaces, and really when we were considering the plan of the house, this porch was like another room of the house, and it was considered that way. The dining space flows out into the porch, and the living space does as well. So it's really another room of the house, and that carries over into some of the garden spaces. There's the courtyard garden, there's the walled garden, that's the private garden off the master bath. So there's various levels of indoor-outdoor connectivity. The whole garden is a series of rooms that plays off the plan of the house.
Well, it's such a beautiful example of the garden home.
Well, thank you.
Here we are in the middle of autumn, and it's spectacular, but in the spring, when all the roses are in bloom, it's equally beautiful, if not more, if you're a flower lover, and especially the way they actually frame the windows of the house.
Yeah, in the walled garden we used the that gigantic ladybank's rose to frame the little oculus window looking into the potting shed. We have the rose behind us that goes up the corner of the screen porch.
And that's climbing iceberg.
Yeah, it's a great rose.
Yeah, blooms all the time.
Everything has its peak and its season, but the continuity through it all, the thing that makes it work is you always have this majestic view to fall back on. It changes with the seasons. In the spring, the lime green of the new foliage, and then in the fall, the fall colors. So it's really an ever-changing vista.
The oculus that you created in the pediment of the porch runs right through the house, and you can appreciate the views through that oculus from actually inside the home.
Yeah, actually there's a bedroom up in the very center of the house. What we did is just cut this oculus, and so you have this discrete little framed view looking through the twin oculus out at the valley, and it's actually a lot more interesting than if you didn't have it, than if it were just wide open. Sometimes containing the view makes it a lot more intriguing than just a wall of glass and nothing to frame it. Looking back up towards the house, we've used sweet gums and the Italian cypress to frame the view of the facade of the house, primarily this porch.
Yeah, the Italian cypress adds such a strong element of verticality.
Yeah, they do. They provide that vertical emphasis, and because they're evergreen, it's effective year-round. And then that's really complemented by the upright shape of the sweet gum rotunda loba. And then the London plane trees will eventually form massive shade trees and give us a break from this heat on the western side of the house.
And plus their bark in winter, all year long, is really outstanding.
Yeah, it really is. There's really nothing quite as spectacular as that gray-green bark in the winter.
Another example of framing the views in this garden that shouldn't go unnoticed is this series of columns, or this colonnade on the back side of the house. You see, the views from inside the house are framed by these rustic columns that support this beautiful classical pergola. Now, it's covered with old-fashioned roses. This white blooming one is a noisette called Lamarck. I grow it on my tool shed. It's very floriferous. You can see it continues to throw off blooms even late in the fall. Now, as we've toured this garden, I'm sure you've noticed that it's divided into lots of individual garden rooms. You see, when I'm designing a garden, it's so much easier for me to break the space down into individual rooms. It's also a lot easier for me to take care of a garden when it's divided into these rooms. And when I say rooms, I don't mean that literally, but it is an extension of this idea of the rooms in our homes. Walls can be a hedge, a fence, or even implied by a series of columns. Garden rooms have floors and pathways. Some common floor materials are gravel, brick, grass, stone, even ceramic tiles. And then, of course, there's the ceiling. In the garden room, that's usually the sky, except in cases where one might be under a porch or under a beautiful pavilion such as this. You see, I believe that our garden rooms should be as beautifully appointed as our homes. We should have the same creature comforts outdoors as we do inside, affording us beautiful places to relax, dine, and entertain friends. This garden room is certainly an extension of the home, and it provides a relaxing place to spend a lazy afternoon painting, reading, or just daydreaming. Now, there's no time for daydreaming just now because I want to share with you some examples of framing the view in my own garden home. If you stand in my front garden and look back through the arbors, the entries to my fountain garden, you look down the long axis and you can see the tool shed at the terminus. This is a focal point in the garden. Now, a focal point is another design principle, but as you can see, it works in harmony with this idea of framing the view. To bring the garden closer to me, especially in winter when it's too cold to enjoy being outdoors, I've made my fountain garden an extension of my study. You can look out the windows, which serve as frames, and see the garden beyond. Using this approach, I've taken advantage of an existing structure, the window of my house, and framed the view outside the window. Here's another way I've framed the view in my garden. Along my woodland path, I've created a view through this cypress arch. I simply planted a hedge of the fast-growing leyland cypress and cut an arch in the center of it. Peeking through this, you can see a wide range of shade-loving plants. There's foxglove, lamium, hosta, rhododendron, azaleas, Solomon seal, and impatiens. This cypress arch reminds me of another principle that harmonizes well with the idea of framing the view, and that's accenting the entry. An arbor or arch creates a picture for the visitor of what lies beyond. To really set off this framed view, I suggest accenting the entries. In my garden, I created an entry that's made up of 3 simple elements: a gate, an arbor, and a beautiful New Dawn rose. The rose really says welcome, and as you approach the gate, you're greeted with a picture of the garden. One of my favorite times of the year to see this framed view is in the spring, when the pink impression tulips fill the beds in the rondelle. You can also accent the entry and thereby frame the view by using something as simple as containers. A few years ago, I was inspired to plant a pair of wisteria trees in containers on each side of the path leading to my tool shed. And I enjoy making seasonal containers full of beautiful annuals to bring sparkle to entries. If the thought of creating a container seems daunting, then let me put your mind at ease. Just start with the basics. Ask yourself, where will the container be placed? Will it be in sun or shade? Then from there, make your plant choices and then work out the design of the container. You see, I like to look for something that's tall and spiky to go in the center, then something round and full to fill out the base, and for a finishing touch, cascading plants to spill over the edge. Now, if you're looking for a bright colored container that'll take sunny conditions, you might want to give this one a try. I chose the canna Tropicana for the tall, spiky element. You see, cannas are considered tropicals and grow from rhizomes. They come in many colors and even sizes and are perfect as a centerpiece of a planting or massed together where they can serve as a backdrop to many other sun-loving garden plants. Now you can see next to the canna I filled in with several plants including Lelani ageratum, Coleus copper, and lime rock ruby coreopsis to create the round and full effect. I have to say that I'm really knocked out by these Coleus. While traditionally a shade plant, I found that the more sun they get, the more vivid the colors become. Some of my favorites come from a series called the Stained Glass Works. Petunias are wonderful for adding a splash of color to containers and to flower beds. Just remember, to keep them blooming all summer long, you need to feed them regularly. And cascading down the front is a very popular ground cover called sweet potato vine. This variety is Ace of Spades. I think it really gives the composition a finishing touch. Now remember, the flip side to framing the view, which I mentioned earlier, is screening the view, cutting out anything you necessarily don't want to see, and embracing what makes your garden space more ideal. You can see where this would work really well in a city environment. No matter how much you like your neighbors, you don't want to see them all the time. I've used a variety of plants to screen views, such as this Russell's Cottage Rose and several other old-fashioned rose varieties that I grow in my front garden. You see, while they don't create a solid screen, they do provide a more intimate and private feeling in this area. I started with a picket fence, and then I began growing climbing and shrub roses along the fence. And within a few years, well, here are the results. I've also used 3 columnar-shaped arborvitae in the front to screen the garden from a busy intersection. As you can see, these arborvitaes are a great evergreen screen. Some others you might consider are hollies of many varieties, yew, the fast-growing cryptomeria and leyland cypress, as well as southern magnolias if you live in a warm part of the country and you've got an area that needs to be screened in a big way. If you're looking for a gray screen, that's right, a gray hedge, you might try using this Elaeagnus or silverberry. It's called Elaeagnus abingii, and it takes pruning very well. You can see that this effectively separates the drive from the garden beyond. During a visit to Chicago, Claire Kettlecamp, a landscape architect with the Douglas Hare firm, took me on a tour of a garden where screening the view helped to pull the entire project together. Well, Claire, I understand this garden was strictly utilitarian and functional in the beginning, and now you've turned it into something beautiful and fun.
That's right. It was actually a driveway.
Look at this. It's gorgeous.
We had a lot of challenges with this garden. We have 4 air conditioners.
So all the AC units for the house are here.
And then we have 4 dogs.
So there's a dog run incorporated
So it
in
had to
this.
be functional and beautiful.
I love the way you've screened this area with the bleached linden trees.
The lindens are used to define the space and to provide screening. And I think it's an underutilized horticultural technique. It's actually a hedge on top of a wall.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's a hedge on stilts.
That's right. It's a very effective screen.
I love the rhythm the trunks create. Quite a nice cadence along
It
the
really
wall.
does. It really does.
It gives the space wonderful privacy.
Which was our criteria in the design of this garden.
This garden is really about enclosure.
Enclosure and pattern.
Yes, I'd have to say, look at the marvelous brick, and which leads off onto stone, and then the planting itself has its own pattern. I love these rectilinear shapes of boxwood.
It was basically designed on a grid, and the boxwood are trained in different heights. We have tall, medium, and low.
Well, I see the seasonal plantings are also planted in a pattern. You've got herbs mixed with impatiens. I guess that's New Guinea impatiens.
Yes, it is New Guinea. The New Guinea is planted in a checkerboard, and the herbs mingle in and among them.
Oh, it's wonderful. Well, even though this is a very formal layout, the softness of these plantings really give it a comfortable, relaxed feeling.
Yes, and a warmth. And again, a utilitarian component of the garden.
Right, you can take these herbs directly into the kitchen and create a wonderful meal.
That's right.
What's marvelous about this garden is the simple, limited palette of plants you've used. You've got the linden trees themselves, the boxwood, some pachysandra as a ground cover, and that's essentially it.
It makes the design very cohesive.
What's so appealing about this is that you really have a limited amount of space that you have to change out seasonally.
That's right.
The framework is here, it's consistent, and then you just have these pockets that you plant out in the spring and summer. Tell me about the focal point, because as we came in, I couldn't help but notice that statue on the wall there.
That's Pan, and he's actually a water feature. He's a fountain that adds a tranquil quality to the space.
So much in such little space. How large is this area, would you say, Claire?
I would say it's about 25 or 30 feet wide and about 50 feet long.
I think what I like so much about it, it's so manageable.
It really is. It's not overwhelming.
No, it's not. Thank you so much for sharing this space with us. I think it gives us lots of ideas on how we can take a small space and make the most of it.
Well, you're more than
It's
welcome.
been a real pleasure. This idea of screening the view applies to any size property. So often, if we can figure out a way to screen off an area, we can create new gardens and new living spaces to enjoy outdoors. Claire's design was in the suburbs, and the house had an Italian country feel. One of Claire's colleagues, Kathleen Galome, showed me an apartment garden in downtown Chicago where framing the view and screening the view were essential to get the look her clients wanted. What a spectacular view. Obviously, this garden was designed around that view of Lake Michigan.
Absolutely. It's incredible. The architecture, it's a David Adler building, so we wanted to just build on the exquisite architecture that was already here, and obviously screen views that weren't appropriate and open up the ones that were just spectacular.
Well, you've done a magnificent job. The building itself and this big ball finial create a beautiful frame for this vista.
Exactly. And working with the plant material here is also a challenge, dealing with the wind. The wind is somewhat desiccating, so we do have to adjust the irrigation. This is more of a casual dining terrace, so it's usually used more in the morning to enjoy breakfast here. So it's just a little bit more of the mellow colors, some deeper rich purples, some nice fuchsia pinks, and some just really, really nice texture features, which is what was important, especially in the morning hours.
The screen that you've put up on the side of the garden, I really like the way that works because it's not a solid screen. You do get little vistas or vignettes through the screen itself and the hanging baskets, but it does serve to give one a sense of intimacy and privacy in this place.
Exactly, and it's just amazing. Once we do put the baskets on in the spring and summer and even through the fall, Again, that greenery helps just enclose the space so it does feel more private, even though it is still open and airy at the same time. We do a very full, lush spring rotation. We have tried in the past to try and overplant bulbs in the fall to see if they'd actually come up. We've had limited success with that.
Is it because it's so cold here and the ground freezes and it really debilitates the bulb?
Exactly. These specific containers are not insulated, so it is more difficult to have those bulbs overwinter and not freeze out completely. And then it is changed out again in the summer. Fall, we take out some of the tender plants, supplement with fall cool season crops, and then for winter, we have a nice winter display with cut branches and evergreen boughs.
Well, that's the wonderful thing about container gardening, because you can change it out for any season or any look or color theme.
Exactly.
Very good. Well, this has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the tour. Whether you have a lot of space or none at all, there's no reason why you shouldn't have lots of color in your life throughout the gardening season. Here's a project that will help you create framed views right at your window. It's my design for an easy window box. To assemble this, I started with a 4-inch 2x12 board and 3 10-inch terracotta pots. I traced the pots off and cut out 3 holes just large enough for the 10-inch clay pot to drop in. You see, the collar or the lip of the container holds it in place. Now, the brackets are made from a piece of the 2x12 board, and they're connected by a 1x4 board that just runs across the back. This is important because it's this board that will allow you to mount the window box to your house. I like to use wood screws in assembling these because it keeps the wood from splitting. From here, just use your imagination when it comes to color. Drop in pots of your favorite flowers throughout the season. Once you frame the view, you should begin to think about a focal point, something to capture your attention and direct the eye. In this small walled garden, we have a pool and a fountain to serve as a focal point. But a focal point can be just about anything. In this garden, it's a fountain. But in other gardens, it might be a building or an urn of plants or a statue. And the focal point should always fit the scale of the garden. In my garden, a large statue would be out of place, but a simple bench fits just right. During a visit to one of the grandest gardens in England, Chatsworth, I noticed a marvelous framed view with a focal point punctuating the end. I asked the Duchess of Devonshire about this crinkle-crankle hedge and the bust at the end. You know, one of the things that strikes me about the garden here at Chatsworth is that it's very axial. The marvelous thing about walking through the garden is that at every turn you can look down a path and you see a focal point or an eye catcher. Tell me about the inspiration for the serpentine lines that lead up to the 6th Duke's bust, the crinkle-crankle, as it were.
Yeah, well, that was easy. I would have loved to have put a wall there, but of course it was been so expensive we couldn't have done it. And we thought it needed a better approach, that bust. It was just in a wood. So the wall was out of the question, and so we planted beech instead. But they looked daft for years and years because they went in at 18 inches high.
I see.
And it just looked as if a child had been playing garden design. You know? And so we had to wait about maybe 15 years. But it's pretty high now, isn't it?
Well, it's certainly come into its own. It's beautiful.
Good. Very glad you think.
You came to this house and began to create a garden, you and the Duke, some 50 years ago.
Yeah.
How did it feel coming to this place and creating a garden here? Did you ever feel like you were stepping on the toes of ghosts?
No, because when we came here, we were both 30. And then you think you can do anything, don't you? I think a house like this, you've got to get used to it, and you've got to get its own feel. It has a very strong, for better word really, personality of its own. And when you've been here for a bit, it makes its own rules in a funny way.
Your garden design instincts are marvelous. The kitchen garden, the cottage garden, these beautiful blue borders here behind us. They really speak to me.
Well, that's really nice of you.
Remember, when I create a garden home, I employ 12 principles of design. And in today's show, we focused on framing the view. And of course, hand in hand with framing the view is screening out those unsightly views. The two gardens in Chicago are great examples of framing the view by eliminating the intruding views of unsightly buildings and busy neighborhoods. We also talked about focal points. Remember at Chatsworth, the bust of the 6th Duke of Devonshire, framed by that magnificent crinkle-crankle hedge. Another way to frame the view is by accenting the entry, which I did in my woodland garden with a cypress arch, and also with those rose arbors that look into my rondelle garden. So I challenge you, now that you've seen the show, to take a look at your own garden and take note of the views you want to keep and improve upon, and those you want to screen, and then set out as an artist would to frame the views. From the Garden Home, I'm Alan Smith. More information about today's topic and other topics covered in this series can be found at pallansmith.com.
On an upcoming episode of P. Allen Smith's Garden Home.
Hi, I'm Alan Smith. Join me as we explore the effect time has on the garden. And I don't mean how plants grow over time. I'm also talking about the past, for instance, an old home, antique or antique-looking garden ornaments, even artifacts found while working in a garden, plus great ideas for bringing color into your garden. So join me.